So welcome to my class. In continuation with Unit 3, Statistical Tools and their Interpretation, we are doing index numbers. And in index numbers, we talked about the methods of constructing index numbers with the help of, there are two types, simple and weighted. So simple, and they're just two methods. One is the aggregative method and the other is average of price relative. Okay, so index numbers are calculated like that. And in today's class, I'm going to do the various types of some important index numbers, in which we have what is known as the consumer price index, then we have what is known as the the wholesale price index, and we have the index of industrial production. So we'll be doing one by one, and today I'm going to talk about consumer price index. So let me just get going with it. So we are going to do consumer price index, which is also known as cost of living index, retail price index. It's also known as retail price index. It's also known as price of living index. And before I go on, let me just tell you, one thing to note is that consumer price index is always a weighted index. And we know that weighted, there are two types. One is the simple index numbers and the other weighted index numbers. And there are two methods to calculate both of them. One is the aggregative expenditure and the other aggregative method, and the other is the price relative method, average of price relative method. So both are used in the simple. In the simple also we use these two methods, and in the weighted also we use these two methods. Now coming to this, we are going to do again, let me just repeat that consumer price index is also known as cost of living index, retail, it's also known as retail price index, sometimes it's also called price of living index. And there are two methods of constructing the consumer price index. One is the aggregative expenditure method. This is the formula. Now what is the formula? Consumer price index by the aggregative expenditure method is sigma P1. You know the price index method? What is sigma P1 upon P0 into 100? Well, let's put the weights. Q0 into Q0. So it is sigma P1 into Q0 divided by sigma P0 into Q0 into 100. This gives you the aggregative expenditure method of constructing consumer price index. And the other one is consumer price index is sigma relative, the price relative of each commodity, into the weights divided by the weights. That is a family budget method. So we have these two methods to look at. Okay. And generally in India, we see that there are three consumer price indices that are constructed. One is for the industrial workers, consumer price index for the industrial workers, then consumer price index for the urban non-manual workers, and third is consumer price index for the agricultural laborers. So basically we have these three. So let me just repeat myself. What is consumer price index once again? So consumer price index, as we see, tells us about the, just to understand it very simply, it tells us what has been the change in the prices, what has been the effect of inflation on this. So it reflects, what does a consumer price index reflect? It reflects the average increase in the cost of the commodities consumed by a class of people. It can be the industrial workers, or it can be urban non-manual workers, it can be agricultural laborers. This is the three that we make here in India. So by a class of people, so that they can maintain the same standard of living in the current year as in the base year. Or maybe perhaps they will not be able to maintain, but if the policy makers will make sure that the inflation does not really eat up their standard of living. So they can increase their dearness allowance, or they can make policies, they can help to reduce taxes and all of that, or to increase taxes for some group of people. and that is the basic idea. All right. So talking about, once again, I hope you've understood. So because this will be more of a theoretical class. In the next class, I'm going to do the methods of constructing consumer price index, that is the aggregative expenditure method, and with family budget method, with the help of a numerical, which we've already done before in the weighted index number. I'm going to use the same numerical so that you really know what I'm getting at. So consumer price index numbers are intended to represent the average change over a time in prices paid by the ultimate consumers. So this index number is also called cost of living index number. Now what happens? The need for constructing this index number arises from the fact that the general price index numbers fail to give an exact idea of the effects of the change in the general price level on the cost of living of different groups of population. The commodities are broadly classified into the following groups, like for example food, clothing, fuel and lighting, then you have house rent, and of course miscellaneous group. So major groups are like food, and they have written, and they have decided on the weights also. Okay, so I can show you, I have this NCRD book here in which they have given this. Like for example, they've given the weights, and this is how it is divided. Okay, so the major groups are given as that. It was given, the source they say is the Economic Survey 2004-5, Government of India, which means you can see it in any of the economic surveys. Every year it changes. So once again, in India, 3 consumer price index are constructed. They are called consumer price index for industrial workers, then consumer price index for urban non-manual workers, and consumer price index for the agricultural laborers. So they are routinely calculated every month to analyze the impact of changes in the retail price on the cost of living of these 3 broad categories of consumers. The consumer price index for industrial workers and agricultural laborers are published by the Labour Bureau, Shimla, and the Central Statistical Organization publishes the consumer price index number of urban non-manual employees. Okay. This is necessary because their typical consumption baskets contain many dissimilar items. So, like for example, I just showed you that in the table that all these groups, the major commodities of the groups is given was shown in the table. Now, in this, the food had the largest weight because food is the most important category. Any rise in the food prices will have a significant impact on consumer price index. So that is how this explains the government's frequent statement that oil prices hike will not be inflationary. Sometimes they just keep saying no, it won't be inflationary because of this reason. All right, so once again, let me just tell you that consumer price index is, what does it reflect? The average increase in the cost of the commodities consumed by a class of people so that they can maintain the same standard of living. And remember, consumer price index is always a weighted index number. Weights have to be considered always. Importance are given to these general group of items. And in India, 3 consumer price index are constructed. One is the consumer price index for the industrial workers. Second is the consumer price index for the urban non-manual workers, and third is consumer price index for the agricultural laborers. And again, let me reiterate whatever we've been doing, that types of index numbers are consumer price index, then we have, which is CPI, we have the wholesale price index, that is the WPI, and we have the index for industrial production. And in today's class, we are going to limit ourselves to consumer price index. And consumer price index is also known as cost of living index. Second is retail price index and price of living index. So if you're asked to define any of these, if they say what do you mean by retail price index, you can the definition will be the same. That is, or what does the cost? Okay, suppose if you get a question as what does the price of living index, what does it reflect? you can just say that it reflects the average increase in the cost of the commodities consumed by a class of people, so that they can maintain the same standard of living in the current year as they were doing in the base year. So okay, one more thing. So what are this is important now. What are the what are the steps involved in the construction of the price index number? So what is it? So we have to first decide what are the class of people for whom the index is meant to be. Okay, we have to really essentially decide clearly the class of people for whom the index is meant. So that is whether it relates to industrial workers, teachers, officers, whatever. This index, the scope of the index must be clearly defined. For example, when we talk of teachers, we are referring to primary teachers, secondary level teachers, etc., all the teachers taken together. Along with the class of people, it is also required to cover geographical area. Okay, so for example, index numbers are different from time to time, place to place, person to person also. So you have to keep that in mind too when we are ordinarily constructing an index number. Okay, then we also have, okay, let's just take, we have to conduct a family budget inquiry. Okay, if somebody asks you to do this task, you have to find out the family budget, you have to conduct a family budget inquiry, which means that we have the object of conducting. Why should we do this? Why is it important? Because it will determine the amount that an average family or the group included in the index spends on different items of consumption. While conducting it, say quantities of commodities consumed and their prices are taken into account. The consumption pattern then can be easily found out. The inquiry is conducted on random basis by applying, say, lottery method. Maybe some families are selected at random from the total number and their family budgets are scrutinized in detail. The items on which money is spent are classified into well accepted groups such as food, clothing, fuel, lighting, house rent and miscellaneous. And then you can further divide into subgroups. Okay. Now for example, now the broad group of food may include wheat, rice, pulses, sugar, etc. Similarly, clothing may cover clothing, beddings, blankets, towels, footwears, etc. And then of course, if you really want to go ahead, you have to also know, another step is obtaining the price quotations. The collection of retail prices is very important and at the same time it's a very difficult task though, because such prices may vary from place to place, shop to shop and even person to person. Price quotations should be, suppose I'm very good at bargaining, maybe I get a better price. That's why it's person to person. Or, okay. So price quotations should be obtained from localities in which the class of people concerned reside or from where they usually make their purchases. Some recommended principles are like the retail prices should relate to the fixed list of items, and for such items the quality should be fixed by means of suitable specification. Then the retail prices should be those which are actually charged from the consumers, and the discount also should be taken into account if it is given at all to the consumers. Okay. So in the period of price control or rationing, whether illegal prices are charged openly, such prices should be taken into account also along with control prices. Now in the cost of living index, price is the most important element. So we must be very careful in the collection of price lists. Price lists are collected by special agents or mail questionnaires. Oh, okay. Now, and the cost of living index is a weighted index. As I said, CPI, just remember one thing. Consumer price index is always a weighted index. So, the price of the index number of its relatives must be weighted because there is different relative importance of various items for different classes of people. So, this can be found out only by the amount spent on various items. Having said that, having explained in detail, then there are two basic methods. One is the aggregative expenditure method Just remember this. When we did the weighted index number, what did we do? What did we do? We did sigma P1. This is what? Last year's method, when we've taken the base year quantity. Alright, so sigma P1, alright, that is, remember, it is sigma P1 into Q0 divided by sigma P0 into Q0 into 100. So that is it. And the second one is the average of price relative method. Weighted average of price relative method. So relative is what? Price relative is, what is this? Of each item you take current price into base year price into 100. Okay. And then you add up all of those. And then take the weights. Either the weights will be given. Okay. The weights of the base year is given. Or if the weights are not given, then make sure to put it as, generally we do it P0, Q0. You can work out the weights as that. Either the weights are given or you can work out the weights. And then you can find out. Alright. So in the next class, we are going to do the methods of constructing consumer price index. And I hope that you've understood a little bit about the theory about the methods of constructing price index. And let me just tell you, please, in your notebooks, write it down, make small questions as to what are the types of index numbers, then what is the consumer price index also known as, what are the methods, third is what are the methods of constructing consumer price index, and what are the 3 consumer price index that are constructed. And you can go ahead and also find out that what is the basis of, what is the base year, what is the base year. Okay, so then you're good to go then.